Hello, YouTube. Um, it's been a good while since I've talked to you a little bit about disaster preparedness, and we were up in the mountains the other day, and one thing we were thinking about was fuel. And I remember a few years back when a pipeline in Alabama was ruptured or whatever, and in this area we didn't have any gasoline. We had to go up to Charlotte to get gasoline, and all the stations in our area were just out of gas. I also remember back in the 70s when we didn't have gas and people would wait in lines for gasoline. So, fuel and such is something that in a disaster situation you may encounter shortages of fuel. One of the things that contributes to those shortages is the electricity and the inability to pump gasoline at your local gas station. So that may be a problem. So the questions are, where do I get gas in those situations, and is it going to be beneficial to me to store some gas along with some of the other things that I'm storing and preparing for? When you store gasoline, there's some dangers there. Whenever you store large volumes of flammable substances, it's a fire hazard. There's just no question about it. A big fire hazard. If anybody's ever seen gasoline go up, as it really is tough situation. So it's one thing you need to consider, and consider a safe place to keep it to where it's away from all sort of flammable ignition sources and such. And also keep it maybe away from where you're inhabiting. You don't want it to be right next to where you're living. So consider those things first if you're even considering storing some gasoline. The other things to consider with storing gasoline is that when you store gasoline, you've got a few problems. One is the ethanol in the gas creates a problem in two ways. Ethanol in gasoline separates out over time, and it actually precipitates out water. And water in your gas can cause several problems. One is as it goes through your ignition system of your vehicle or your engine, it will shut it down. If you're not burning fuel, you're trying to burn water, and water just doesn't burn very well. So that may be a big problem with ethanol in the gas. The other thing is that if you do precipitate out that water, then what it does is it forms a layer of water with an interface between the water and the gasoline. And in that interface, and I know this is true in diesel fuel, and it can also happen but rarely in gasoline, but in that interface you can actually get some growth of algae and such like that. And you think about algae growing in fuel is a strange deal, and it is, but it can grow in that interface where you have bacteria actually feeds on the carbon compounds in the fuel, and then it's got the water there on the other side. So it's a strange deal, but something that could clog up your fuel system. So it really could create a problem. So our question is, how can we store fuel? And if we do store fuel, how long can we store it for? Most people recommend that if you store fuel, it really only has about a 3-month lifespan. Some people say 6 months. One person said up to a year. I wouldn't count on it. What happens is over time, fuel stored either in your engine, gas tank, or whatever actually produces varnishes, and the varnish could coat your fuel system and clog it up, and that wouldn't be a good thing. But it just breaks down over time too. Some people say that ethanol-free gas lasts a good bit longer, and that's true. Ethanol-free gas is a better deal to store, and it may last as long as 6 months to a year that you can use it, and storing that's not going to be as big of a problem. One thing you can do, and this is what I do with all my fuel, both that I don't store a lot of fuel, but I store enough so that if I need a generator, I'll have a generator and that sort of thing. But one thing that you can do is you can get a fuel stabilizer. And I have fuel stabilizers for both my diesel fuel for the tractors and for the gasoline engines. And they're different. Don't try to use a gasoline fuel stabilizer for a diesel engine or diesel fuel. Make sure it's specific for that type of fuel. But I use it because over the winter, we have fuel that's sitting there for the lawnmowers and that sort of thing. And the tractor, I try to crank it up every month, but the fuel's still sitting there in the fuel tank, and I want it stabilized so that it's not going to deteriorate over time. But you can get a fuel stabilizer. I have one here. This one came from Northern Tool, and I got it with my generator. But I keep stabilized fuel on hand just because if the power does go out for an extended period of time and I do have to use a generator, I don't want the fuel that I have to end up causing the generator shut down. So you definitely want to stabilize that fuel if you're going to store it for a period of time. Some people store a lot of gallons of fuel for their cars in case they have a situation like we had with the Alabama pipeline. The recommendation there, and a lot of people will do this, and I think it's a smart thing to do, is maybe have several 5-gallon cans of fuel and rotate those 5-gallon cans of fuel. When you every month have one that you cycle through every month, where you'll go to the gas station, take your 5-gallon can and fill up your car with it, and then go to the gas station and fill up your 5-gallon can when you fill up your car the rest of the way, so that you have fresh fuel in there. And if you're planning on leaving it there for a while, go ahead and stabilize it. But if you cycle your cans, you can store 30 gallons, which is 6 months supply, of rotation, where you can rotate every month for 6 months if you have 30 gallons of fuel. And 30 gallons of fuel will give you a tank load of your car. And the good thing about that is, if you think about your distance, you can actually go somewhere for that distance if you do need to go somewhere to another location or something like that. So storing fuel is something to consider. I consider it because I do have my generator that I use when the power's out, so I'll store enough fuel to get me through a few days with the generator. But I use it very conservatively. I don't leave the generator running all the time. I'll use it to crank it up to make sure that the refrigerator is cold, and then shut it down. I'll use it at a particular time that I want to charge batteries, and then I'll shut it down. So you use your fuel conservatively. Make sure you stabilize your fuel, and be very, very careful as you're storing fuel. But fuel is something to consider in disaster situations. So hope you don't need it. It's one of those things that you don't want to ever have to need any of the information we're going over. But if you need it, take advantage of the opportunity now to make preparations for that time. So like this video if you enjoyed it, and then subscribe, and I'd appreciate if you have any questions or whatever. I'd be happy to go over things. And the best thing that I've had are comments from other people about other solutions to problems. So keep the comments coming, and I appreciate it. Y'all have a great day. Bye-bye.